Good morning, good afternoon, wherever in the world you are, and happy Peikoff Wednesday. Happy sexy Peikoff Wednesday. And I am joined by James Valliant to talk about sexuality. We talked about sex before, but it's time for more sex because there are issues in the culture out there today, right now, in the headlines and certainly in the chats and the forums that need a little straightening out, that need a little bit of Peikoff magic. James Valliant, how are you doing on this fine Wednesday?
I'm doing spectacularly well, sir. And yes, there is so much wisdom to be gleaned from Dr. Peikoff's applications of objectivism to real life. So let's keep it real here. I myself can never get satisfaction, to quote Mick Jagger on the topic of sex. So let us dive right in.
That's right. We are satisfied, but not for long. Tomorrow's another day. This evening's another night. And just in case anybody's coming across this show and I see some of my favorites are already in the chat there and thinking, well, things are different now, though. You know, in some ways, things are different. We are facing cultural challenges we've never faced before. And yet, some of these truths, most of these truths, are timeless. And these values are both irreplaceable and lasting. And if you question that, if you have any doubts, stick around, listen to what Leonard Peikoff says, and you will say, oh my gosh. And I'll start right now with question number one, just to show you what I mean. Leonard Peikoff was asked this on his podcasts and answered it on the podcast and in the book, Keeping It Real. Does morality require that you be in love with a person to have sex? Now, before I give Dr. Peikoff's answer, James, this was an interesting question to me because it's one of those topics where as soon as somebody asks a question, half of my answer is just going to be defining their terms. Well, what do you mean in love?
Right.
And what do you count as sex?
Right.
I did not have sex with that woman. Well, because you didn't do this one particular thing? No. So let me give Dr. Peikoff's answer because his answer on this one is very short. And then I really want to talk about that. Leonard Peikoff says, I do not mean to recommend promiscuity or casual sex in any form. Sex does require real important values. But I don't think that every act of sex requires every one of your important values. In that sense, the individual you sleep with is not irreplaceable. They're not everything in the form you want of, well, that's unique. But that doesn't mean they can't have real important values that would warrant a meaningful and not a casual sexual response. Now, unquote Leonard Peikoff, this was in the context of the idea that you shouldn't just sleep around, that you should be with somebody who is a real value to you, that sex and love cannot be sundered, or sex and values cannot be sundered. And I think it requires knowing Ayn Rand's perspective and consequently Leonard Peikoff's perspective on, well, what is love? I've never slept with somebody I didn't love. Well, sure, by a very broad definition of love, but what does Ayn Rand consider to be love? In the sense of romantic sexuality, you know, we come up with the idea of, or she comes up with the idea of an irreplaceable value. And that is not necessarily required for sexuality. For you to have sex with somebody, it simply requires substantial values.
Well, one thing that just leaps to mind is that people cannot be automatically certain that this is the one person that they, at least in this context, want to spend the rest of their life with. This is the most important value, human value, that they've ever found. Now, you can't know that all at once. Not just this certainty about this doesn't happen overnight, like a bolt of lightning, a flash of whatever, Cupid's arrow, or whatever other analogies they might have to it. Love is not blind. Love is not magic. Emotions are not causeless. They're not irreducible primaries. They're not metaphysical axioms. And to know another person takes a long time. And to know that they are the right value for you, the best for you, is not something we can know with certainty automatically all at once. It takes time. And part of the process, frankly, is becoming intimate with someone. You kiss someone. Come on. If you don't start having some kind of physical, intimate interaction with them, I'm not going to define exactly how far it has to go. That's up to the individuals involved. But and believe me, I'm not going to give you a prescriptive menu on, what sex acts are approved and what sex acts are not approved at what stage, because that all depends upon context. But the point is, if I don't start intimate interaction with the other human being, how on earth am I going to know that the full chemistry is there and that this is really going to work out and this is the person for me? If we take ourselves seriously, we take our highest values seriously. If we sleep around and we really don't give much attention to the person, then we're missing out, in my view, on the real value of love, the real value of intimacy, the thing we should be seeking here. Objectivism is all about taking yourself seriously and therefore taking your highest values seriously. You don't want to approach this casually. Not anyone is going to do. In fact, they're going to have to meet a very high criterion, but to know that they've met that high criterion will take time. You'll have to get to know them in various ways, including whether you guys can just get along, whether you joke together, whether you can, coexist together. But a part of that is also, how does physical intimacy at some level work with you? I couldn't know. I'm sorry, part of my important database there is at least some intimate interaction with the person so that I know that we have chemistry and this will work out.
Yes. It brings to mind something Yaron Brook often says, which is that he thinks it's a moral requirement that if you're going to marry somebody, you sleep with them first. Now, that might sound kind of obvious or unusual to people.
A little concrete bound to me. I can understand contexts in which you could start already getting the idea, oh, this is the one, without having completed the deal. But I tend to agree with him. For me, if I hadn't completed the deal, I would really not know if I was fully in love and that this was going to be my romantic partner for life or something. And that's what we're seeking. I'm not seeking in romantic love popularity, an opinion poll, how many people I can impress. That's pure social metaphysics. That's assuaging some kind of lack of self-esteem, some kind of terrible insecurity, where I'm trying to gain value from the sheer number of conquests or variety of conquests that I could have. We are looking for serious exchange of values. That requires mutual visibility, mutual respect is what it really comes down to. And if you don't have that, then you're not getting the real value from an intimate relationship. You're missing out on 99%. It's not just the orgasm, okay? You're missing out on 90%, 99.9% of the value that romantic love is, if that's not what you're seeking. But on the other hand, the discovery process itself takes time and effort, and you don't want to approach a life decision like this casually. So, yeah, I lived with my wife for 2 years before we got married. Lived with her for 2 years before we got married. Talk about doing a practice run. Now, before that 2 years was over, I was already long aware that this was a pretty darn serious thing. And really, it was a question of timing. But the point is, take your time to discover. And nothing can be more fun than that process of discovery itself. Going crazy and not being able to keep your hands off the other person. That's the kind of thing that you want to have that experience of a little bit before you can even know that this is going to be a lifelong romance for you, or at least even potentially a lifelong romance for you.
It's funny, I often, in these conversations, one of the areas I get hung up on is how vague the terms we use are. What do we count as sex? What does sleeping together mean? But I actually like the term sleeping together in this context, because even if for whatever reason you want to save one particular sex act for marriage, I do think people should sleep together. I think the very fact of spending the night together is going to tell you some of those crucial things that you want to know before you decide to get married.
There's a really wonderful moment at the very beginning of a relationship that I've found not only with my own experience, but with lots of other people's experience. This moment where, there's sparks and there's chemistry and there's something going on here. And this is a moment when, no. I want to save this for some special time. So let's delay the consummation of it. And then let's prepare a moment around that so that it's special. That's a very cool thing. That's a very cool moment to be in. But look, there are different stages of our learning about this other person and how well we match together. Never discount it. Knowledge is not automatic. This is complex stuff. We need to gather the data. We need to really understand the other person. It's about visibility. I want to be seen for who I am. I want to be reacted to for who I am. And the same goes the other way around. I want to react to this person that I admire and respect, and they really do represent my highest values. That is a learning process.
Right.
And we each will have different learning processes. Don't get me wrong, processes, but and they're going to be individual depending on the individual context. But it's a learning process in every case.
Yes. I just have to read a quote from Ayn Rand's interview that she did with Playboy magazine in 1964, because she was asked about this, her opinion on both sexuality and promiscuity. And she said, sex is one of the most important aspects of a man's life, and therefore must never be approached lightly or casually. A sexual relationship is proper only on the ground of the highest values that one can find in a human being. Sex must not be anything other than a response to values. That is why I consider promiscuity immoral, not because sex is evil, but because sex is too good, too important.
Good. It's too good for that.
And the questioner asked her, well, do you think sex should require marriage? And she said, sex should involve a very serious relationship. Whether that relationship should or should not become a marriage is a question which depends on the circumstances and the context of two people's lives, unquote. Now consider how that plays out in her novels. She is the opposite of a prude,
All right.
but at the same time, she is also the opposite of promiscuous. The promiscuous sex is saved for the villains in her novels, and rightly so.
One of the most beautiful sequences in all of Ayn Rand's literature is the love story between Hank Rearden and Dagny Taggart. It did not, in the end, work out. But there are so many wonderful things you can learn about Ayn Rand's approach to sex through that relationship. Hank is a married man. Ayn Rand is saying, under those circumstances, in that relationship where Hank doesn't really understand even yet how he's exploited by this woman and how he really doesn't owe her anything because he's got her imprisoned there. Now, we talked about this in an earlier question. Would it have been better if he'd known and just left that horrible, parasite of a wife he had?
If he'd known, yes.
Gone for his highest value. But what the value, though, that they're seeking, Dagny and Hank, is based on their highest values. They're working together, they're achieving together, they admire each other's brains, their character, and so they've found a person their highest value in that context. So it's a serious, even though it is an extramarital affair, it is a serious thing. And then when that extramarital, spoiler alert, it's the big red flag on spoiler alert, but when it does come out that Dagny learns that Hank is being blackmailed because of that affair, she uses her first opportunity to get on the radio and say, it's the proudest thing of my life that I slept with Hank Rearden. And she's, to hell with it, I'm proud of that because it does represent my highest values. He is a great man and I'm proud of that relationship. Even though it didn't work out, she found someone better for her. What a whole range of things that tells you about Ayn Rand and sex. No, you can't be certain. You can't know the future. Dagny might meet a John Galt. On the other hand, take your life seriously. If you respect yourself, if you want the most out of love and sex, You're not going to treat it casually. You're going to be looking for the highest values, at least that you can find in that context. And it's on that basis, if we take it seriously, if we take ourselves seriously, our values seriously, our happiness seriously, that's what we're going to want the best for ourselves. We're not just going to sleep around. On the other hand, are there some religious intrinsic rules that should govern us here? Absolutely not. But at the end of the day, and I love the climax of it when Dagny takes to the airwaves, there's nothing shameful at all. It is one of the greatest, glorious, most wonderful things. And if you are treating it seriously, you should be extremely proud of it, like Dagny Taggart was.
It's that combination we see in Ayn Rand's writing and in her philosophy of she doesn't want anybody to be an ascetic, which is what Hank Rearden was trying to be at the beginning of the story when he realized he doesn't love this woman that he married. And to the extent that he learns who she really is, he never actually loved her, but he feels duty bound, his commitment, his marriage vows, and he wants to live, well, or at least he tries to live asexually. And he can't completely stay away from his wife because he is a passionate man. And sexuality is going to be a part of his life one way or another, but he tries that. And in that regard, I want to go to question number 2, because Leonard Peikoff was asked, well, what is your opinion on asexuality? Now, I've got to say at the outset here, I know people who are asexual psychologically. Some of them have very low sex drive, and the field of sex has no interest in them. Others have substantial conflicts in their lives, which may or not be responsible for that. But in the context of this question, I can't help but bring up today's manosphere. And some of the worst representations of that, from the supposed super sexy players of the game to the flip side of that, the incels, the so-called involuntarily celibate. And you think that's just a fringe, and it is, but it is substantial out there. And there are people even in mainstream communities who think, yeah, I don't know about sex anymore. It's given the culture and the society and how bad things are for men these days. I don't know. So when Leonard Peikoff was asked, what's your opinion of asexuality? That's what I immediately think of.
It is true. We have in the manosphere men who are saying, don't get married. Just in effect, sleep around and use women as you see necessary. Okay, that's one view, all right? And the other view says, no. We have a philosophical movement of incels, involuntarily celibate young men. They say involuntary, but of course, as it turns out, it's totally voluntary because it's based upon their evaluation of a sweeping evaluation of women, how today's women have totally changed the quote natural way things should be, and that therefore, since women are now not the same as they were 100 years ago, sex is no longer available to me. There are even a broader category who aren't philosophically opposed to the way women are supposedly women are these days. They're not like grandma. They're not the feminine mystique. It's just a discouragement. I've seen sadly in my own experience, an increasing number of young men who it's not really philosophical. They just are discouraged or scared about approaching. They don't know. The old rules have gone away. The old rules are fading into the past, and they don't have any principled approach. And the modern world has totally scared them about intimacy at all. And as you pointed out in the beginning, there are contexts. There are people who are physically unable to have sex. There are people who are older, and it's not quite as. And believe me, at 60, it's still an issue for me, but as you get older, it does change. When I see young people, when I was in my 20s, myself and all of my male peers were actively seeking a romantic connection with a woman. It's really sad to see so many young people, whether for misguided philosophical or sociological reasons, or just frightened by the world around them today, throwing in the towel in effect on sex. And that is sad. The most intense single physical and spiritual experience you can have in life is making love with the person that you love. I mean, it really is. And if you cut that out from yourself, and when I see young people cutting that out from themselves, it makes me very, very sad, because what they're doing is they're cutting off one of the greatest joys that life can offer them. And that's really, really distressing. The celibates of the past, religious mystics and ascetics and stuff, that's just philosophically evil. When you look at these incels, they too have been sucked into a bad philosophy. Look, I'm not looking for a statistic. Let's assume whatever they say about statistics. I'm not looking for a statistic. I'm looking for an individual. And the fact that even if you could say 90% of the women out there are X, whatever your evil characteristics you want to, even if that were true, which I do not think it's true, I'm not looking for a statistic, and individuals ain't statistics. I'm looking for, I'm not looking for a statistic, and people aren't statistics. I'm looking for an individual. Right. And in that sense, the whole approach is wrong, obviously. They're throwing in the towel on, something on the basis of statistics. It's kind of, and of course, the philosophy behind it for the philosophical ones is wrong. The old-fashioned, woman like mom used to be is not what you should necessarily be seeking. Not that mom didn't have wonderful values. It's just that the world has changed, and for the better. Women are more independent. Women are stronger. Women are assertive. And if that in itself bothers you, then your philosophy is what you need to check. One of the things I was looking for was a strong, independent woman who could stand up to me. And if that's frightening you away from an intimate relationship, I would consider that a philosophical or psychological issue you need to look into. Because, as I say, you're cutting off one of the absolutely greatest joys life has to offer.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Now, let me read part of Leonard Peikoff's answer here, and he gives a long answer. But first, I've got to give a shout out to Kindred Amy in the chat with a super chat, and putting her money where her mouth is, and says, if a person never meets people in real life, but only online, avoid taking their relationship advice. Yes, it's bizarre that you've got these whole communities of guys writing to each other in forums, telling each other about what sexuality looks like in 2023. These are the last people that you should be listening to in any regard, with regard to relationships or sex. And incidentally, sex is a relationship, even if it's a relationship that only lasts for an evening or a week or a month. And right. That's the mistake, of course, that people make.
Right.
In all of these regards. We've got a second super chat from Catherine. Thank you for that, Catherine. We do appreciate you supporting the Ayn Rand Center UK. Folks, if you're listening live, any super chats you put in, you hit that $sign, make your questions stand out, all goes to support the Ayn Rand Center UK. If you want to support it even more, go to aynrandcenter.co.uk. Link is at the top of the chat. Become a member for $9.99. Now that's pounds, not dollars, UK. But yes, become a member at the silver level or higher. There are now 5. They've added another level on, another tier of membership with a few extra perks and ways that you can support the ARC UK. Again, Leonard Peikoff's asked about asexuality, and he says, I take that to mean asceticism, abstinence, rejection of sex as an activity. If it's a result of a physical cause, then, and you said this, James, if it's a result of a physical cause, then it's not a moral issue. If you can't do it, you can't do it. If it's voluntary, though, then I think it's completely horrible. It is a rejection of life as such, because sex is the most intense pleasure in life, more intense than creativity. Creativity is a different kind, but it does not ever reach the violence that's routine in sex. No, I'm going to stop the quote right there. All too often in conversations about sexuality, I hear people talk about, well, I wasn't in love with her, and therefore this sex we had was just about getting to an orgasm, getting to a particular feeling, getting to a particular moment. And if that's how you experience sexuality, I've got to say, you didn't show up. You weren't there. You weren't experiencing your own sex. That is just not what sex is. You can have orgasms by yourself. You can have orgasms with mechanical toys. That is, as much as that is the culmination of a sex act, it's only the culmination because you are doing that thing with that person, and that changes everything.
Why
If you
would you
catch
have
yourself
that?
thinking about sex in those mechanical ways of, she's here because it makes it better for me, but there's no connection, there's no relationship, you're never looking in her eyes, you could put a paper bag over her head, it wouldn't matter. You are missing out on everything, and I mean that literally, everything that is sex beyond what you could do by yourself.
Right. Why wouldn't, a beautiful image, my imagination and be by myself be sufficient if that's all you're seeking? If really what you need is another person involved, then obviously the relevance of that other person, everything they are, what we've done, unfortunately, it's the mind-body dichotomy at play. And here it is a philosophical issue. It goes back to Plato, low material nature of stuff, the spiritually unphysical other world. And so we have this theory, practice, real ideal dichotomy. And in a lot of young men's heads, sex with the other woman, that physical act in itself, there's some kind of intrinsic value, concrete bound value that they're getting because they've bought into this theory, practice dichotomy. How sad is that? How sad is that?
Right. And one of the reasons I bring up the distinction is because Leonard Peikoff is comparing other creative activity to sexuality. And he says creativity is a different kind, but it does not ever reach the violence that's routine in sex. Unquote. Now, look up a dictionary definition of the word violence, and you will say that word doesn't belong there. But what other word would you use to describe the difference between creative act? You could say passion, you could say excitement. I don't think that quite makes the same point. Leonard Peikoff is making the point that sexuality is visceral. It is a combination of your psychology, your state of mind, and your body, this real world out there. So I'm good with the way he puts that. And he goes on to say, a person who says I'm abstaining from sex is rejecting the highest pleasure in life. And that means the value of life. That is inherently corrupt. I do not believe that that can be honest. And he goes on, if the point wasn't made strongly enough, he says, I believe a belief in God can be honest, but not a rejection of sex. I believe that has to be motivated by rebellion against the body, against the reality of this world, against the genitals. Just a refusal to accept what you are and where you are.
Man.
Unquote. What you are and where you are.
Oh,
the willingness to be in the world, to be grounded in reality, and accept all of what that makes possible, and all of the requirements too, and all the things that can go wrong, and all the messes that can be made, and all the stuff that some people just don't want to deal with.
You're rejecting yourself. It's a question of your love for your own life. It's a question of your own self-esteem. Why are you denying this aspect of your actual nature? And that's exactly what you're doing. It's a kind of self-contempt that is really manifesting itself here. There's no question. Going back to that word violent, it's physical and it's intense. And that intensity, both emotionally and if you're doing it right physically, is extreme. There's an extreme sort of ecstasy that's involved. Let's look at what sex is. It is so intense a reaction that it's a very private reaction. It's a very intimate reaction because there we are getting very physical and vulnerable and having our most basic reactions with this other person because of the intimate, private, powerful nature of this. All that has to be understood about sex. If you're doing that and it's not a matter of serious values, if it's not a matter of an exchange of values and you're taking that seriously, you're not taking yourself seriously, your life or your happiness seriously. That's what it comes down to. So the false alternative of, no standards versus these intrinsic religious standards is what screws people up. That's a bizarre false alternative. If it's that intense, that private, that personal, you want to share it only with someone you trust and respect and value at the highest level. If it's not a pinnacle human value for you, what the heck are you doing there? As you point out, you're missing out on the essence of the value. You're missing out on the whole essence of the value. That's my only additional comment to that.
Yes. Real quick in the super chat, Catherine is asking how to be a member of this channel. The membership link at the top of the chat is to become a member of the Ayn Rand Center UK. That's the big subscription. That's the big sign-on. That's where you're really going to support ARCUK in the biggest way. You can also click the subscribe button in YouTube to become a member of the YouTube channel. And that's another way that you can support the ARCUK. Costs a little bit less, gives you access to a few YouTube feeds you wouldn't have access to otherwise. The big thing is become a member of the ARCUK, but by all means, use both of those methods to support what we do. She's saying she's clicking a join button, but nothing happens. You might need to try that on a PC instead of your phone, for example, or try it on your phone if it's not working on your PC. One way or another, you can get that.
Right.
And I absolutely agree with everything that you've said so far. And we're gonna go on a bit here, and I think we're gonna amplify the things that we've already said. But first, we have another super chat from the very generous Free Trade, who says, someone made the insightful observation that male self-confidence has declined as technology and fossil fuels has made brute physical human strength less important versus the productivity of the mind. This is interesting. Yaron Brook has made this point as well in trying to explain why masculinity and femininity are kind of a mess these days, and men don't fully understand how to practice their masculinity, how to exercise it. And I totally get that. It makes things more challenging, but at the same time, it makes it more exciting when you meet that challenge. And me personally, maybe it's because I'm, one of them modern guys, but that's what I want. That's what I want in a relationship. I don't want to have a woman want me just because, well, I'm a woman and I'm weaker and I look up to you because you can do more. The way that plays out in 2023, it is more subtle, it is different, but it can play out just as strongly, and in my mind, more strongly, given that it's not just, well, I'm Ozzy and you're Harriet. I think we can do better than that. I think we do better than that, but free trade is right to bring it up.
Right.
It's something we've got to think about.
Right to bring it up. I would make a really important distinction here. The fact that all kinds of technology has changed the role of women. Back before reliable birth control and some kind of health, safe abortion came around. A sexually active woman could just expect to be having a baby every other year during her sexually active years or fertility years, from having her first period all the way to menopause. She just get used to being pregnant all the time. And that really changed the way a woman would look at her life. If you look at technology, technology has indeed, in a sense, also changed things. It has equalized the relationship between men and women, and men's muscles in many contexts don't matter. But in this context, the physical difference between men and women still matters. A woman is still a woman and a man is still a man. And our physical differences and our physical relationship, in fact, the resulting emotional differences are still important. So when I'm interacting with my wife, dudes out there, when you're interacting with an individual woman, the same rules about men and women that come from nature, not from some artificial religious intrinsic view of what women should be or what sex should be. No. The nature of men and women hasn't actually changed. And in the individual interaction level, it's still the same. I've used the example before, but if I'm walking with my wife on the beach and she leans into me for strength and she finds a special pleasure in that, or if I take a special pleasure in the fact that she's finding comfort in my strength, that's where the man-woman visibility is happening. And it's still happening on an individual level. I'm happy that machines have given my women, including my wife, all these other opportunities and have equalized things economically. I'm glad that there are guns where she could protect herself from a big, strong guy trying to attack her or something. Those are good things. I'm glad there's birth control so that now she has more control over her life and career and so forth. All those are good things, but none of them have changed the actual male-woman thing. We're still men, we're still women, and there's still part of that that's going to manifest in our individual relationship.
In 1,000 ways, no doubt about it. Now, speaking of old-fashioned ideas about sexuality, because it's interesting when people become more philosophical, ideally when they become objectivists, when they become admirers of Ayn Rand, but they still bring in kind of the baggage of tradition. Question number 3. And again, this is asked in terms an objectivist would ask, but see if this doesn't sound like a remnant of the past. Was my partner immoral not to refrain from sex prior to meeting me, since those acts did not involve love? This is what Leonard Peikoff was asked. And again, we got to kind of bring in the definitions we're working with. Love is an irreplaceable value, kind of final choice or close to it. But this idea that you would want your partner to have refrained from sexual romance before you met him or her, well, it sounds like a throwback to me. I do get the idea, and we talked about this before. You wouldn't want to be with somebody who says, yeah, sex for me is totally casual, means very little. I can sleep with anyone, have a good time. It's all good, man. But let me give the first part of Leonard Peikoff's answer, and then I want to talk about this. He says, I would ask, first of all, well, what kind of partners did she pick? If they were partners that were of significant value to her, men that she respected, men that she admired, even though she didn't love them, well, there's nothing whatsoever wrong with that. There's no requirement that you have to be in love in order to have valid or moral sex. There have to be important values, but, and here we're getting into that objectivist view of romantic love, but love is a very unique situation in which not only are there values, but the form of those values taken in this person is indispensable and irreplaceable, unquote. Now, Dr. Peikoff says more, but just that much, that people can be of value to you without you being in love. And that means taking your values seriously, even though this person isn't your final irreplaceable choice.
We go back to the issues we were talking about before, that learning curve, that discovery curve. I am most grateful that I had relationships before I knew the love of my life, the wife of the last 26 years. And I'm glad that she had the same kind of experiences. We came to it with a much greater knowledge of what we wanted from it, how we were going to go about it because of it. Let me take it to the extreme example. Oh gosh, this is kind of a confession. My first sexual experience, we were both completely inexperienced teenagers. And I can tell you, it was not the best sex I've ever had in my life. It was because someone really ought to know what they're doing.
Sex is like pizza. Even bad pizza is good pizza.
Even bad, I grant you, even bad pizza is good pizza. But still, I was at the dawn of my learning curve. What even is this? What am I looking for here? What works and doesn't work? How do I discover what my partner likes and doesn't like? That learning curve is not automatic. And we all have to go through that learning curve. And even as we're discovering new people and checking out, is this right for me? Is this not right for me? That is an important process we have to go through. And probably we're going to have more than one experience, in my experience, more than one experience with this sort of thing before we can even know who we are getting confident to spend the rest of our life with. But the goal surely is to find this person where the relationship becomes an irreplaceable value. As we get there, we're not quite there. They're not an irreplaceable value until they become this complete representation of your human values in the pinnacle value that I was talking about before, and such that now I can't live without them. My life is, they're an integral part of my whole life. That's what we're seeking. But that seeking of a pinnacle, irreplaceable value is not automatic.
Right. Yeah, I think I would even go further and say that sleeping with somebody who you know is not going to be that irreplaceable value is not necessarily immoral.
Agreed.
Um,
Agreed.
yeah,
Totally agreed. There are many contexts. Life is a complex thing, too. There are so many different contexts, so many different contexts. And again, I wouldn't want to be an intrinsicist or concrete bound about those circumstances. What objectivism says is that sex is good. Seek it. It's an important value in life. As Leonard says, it's the most intense single pleasure you can have in life. We should be seeking an irreplaceable pinnacle value in the process of this discovery. But given that, all objectivism really is saying is don't leave your head behind. Be rational, be honest, be just, be independent. Apart
yes.
from those basic values, work within those values in the context that you find yourself. We're not going to be concrete bound about what situations, okay, that situation is such that it doesn't meet the requirements of being able to have a physical, intimate relationship. No, 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 no. There are even contexts in life in which, again, Atlas Shrugged is a wonderful example. Is Dagny for sure about Hank? Well, in the context, he is a pinnacle, irreplaceable value. He definitely does become that to her. But does that mean that she's not going to meet a John Galt? No, it does not. Contexts are different. Contexts change, even when we're serious and honest, which morality, objectivist morality does say that. If you're not taking your sex life seriously, if you're not taking the pursuit of a high value seriously, you're not taking yourself or your happiness seriously. Is what I'd say. But within that context, there are all number of situations that might come up in which sex is a perfectly appropriate and, in fact, the valuable thing, the right thing to be doing, even when we lack certainty or there's a unique context. Absolutely.
It's funny because when it comes to romance and sex, we think, well, you should have a lot of sex in your life, but you should take it seriously. The word "but" doesn't belong there. Would you say that you should have shelter in your life, but make sure that you live someplace that nurtures your values? You can rest at night. It's a launching pad for you. No, that just goes without saying. If you're going to buy a house or seek shelter, that's what you're going to do. Or would we say, well, you should eat and enjoy food and consider it a high value, but you shouldn't spend all day eating junk food and ice cream. You don't need that advice. If you take food seriously,
exactly.
But when it comes to sex, we think, well, you should have a lot of sex in your life, but you should take it seriously. Of course, you should. If it's a value, you should take it seriously.
Right. And the more important and the more psychologically important that value is, the more seriously you should take it.
Yes.
Yes.
And that's all the more reason why you should not resent if somebody you're romantically interested in has previously had sexual romance in her life. Leonard Peikoff goes on with his answer. He says, well, you wonder if she was immoral because she didn't wait to find you. Absolutely not. How did she know that you were out there or how long it was going to take to find you? Well, if she didn't look, you could say, well, she's not even trying, settling for something that's not love. But suppose she was looking, but she's starving. She can't find anybody, and maybe it'll be years. Do you want her to be in that state because of a maybe? That is not immoral at all. It's wrong of you to expect her to expect you. She's not omniscient. But then he gives the other side of this. He says, well, let's suppose even the worst, that she was promiscuous in the past because of desperation. She didn't know what to do. Well, if you love her now, if she is a great value to you now, even if she had a past of which you disapprove, well, if you think that's all behind her now and she really loves you, then I would say to you, forget the past, throw it out. She's the person that she is now. If you don't believe that she really loves you, then get out of it. But in either case, don't be jealous. Either she is what you want now or she isn't. Criticizing her because she didn't spend her time looking for you or waiting for you is as if you are the center, or excuse me, as if you were the caterer down the block and, well, she's eating who knows what. And you say, well, you should have waited and died of hunger because I was going to come your way in 30 years. That's funny. I didn't know he was going to make the allusion to food at the end there. I only heard the audio version of this. You can't ask that, whether it's 30 years or 30 minutes, unquote, Leonard Peikoff. So again, that same point of, yes, you could wait, but why would you?
Why? Why would you deprive yourself even of the looking? And in the case of someone who's not sure, see, we even have to learn the importance of the value of love. That knowledge is not automatic. That knowledge is not, if if you're not familiar, say, with objectivism, you know your body is telling you this is an important value. Your body is telling you this is an important value. I think the word he zeroed in on there, that the key is jealousy.
Jealousy.
Now, we've made this distinction before. If by what you mean jealousy is someone's got a value, I want a value like that myself, and that's going to inspire me to try and get it myself, that's a wonderful, healthy kind of motivation. If your jealousy, though, is she shouldn't have been happy, she shouldn't have had any sexual experiences before, wait a minute. Now now it's an expression of your insecurity.
Right.
Now that jealousy is actually a manifestation of your lack of self-esteem and your fears that you're not going to live up to her former lovers or something like that.
Yes.
And I'd look into that because that's not healthy.
No, I made the point before, this idea that, and I shouldn't pin it down to particular cultures or parts of the world, but this idea that you want to be with a virgin, that's important to you, that you sleep with somebody who's never slept with anybody else before. In what other domain of life would you say my biggest qualification is I have no idea what I'm doing?
I don't want to be a concrete bound intrinsicist about these things, as I said earlier. On the other hand, I might have one concrete rule. You don't want a virgin. You don't want to be a virgin. You don't want a virgin. You really want to have some experience in this. Now, I'm not saying that you couldn't, in some circumstance, be lucky enough to have just found early on the one love of your life. And so you were both virgins and it did work out. I'm not denying that possibility. Right. So I don't want to be an intrinsicist.
No, this is strictly,
but as a
strictly for people who think that's a qualified, that's a requirement, that's a qualifier.
Right. I want some experience, though, as a general rule, for both me and my partner. So quite the opposite from being a virgin. I don't even understand the value of this concept, virgin. I really do not.
It implies a certain malevolence. And that gives the charm to the idea of, well, you had that in Atlas Shrugged, the idea of, well, we had to learn it from each other. I won't give the spoiler to say which charming couple about which that line was said. I totally get that, the innocence of youth and all of that, but at some point you see beyond that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So let me jump to question number 4 here, because we are finding much to talk about here. I want to at least get this one in. According to objectivism, is it okay to have sex with anyone? Who is the highest and best partner that I can find at this time? Now, when I hear a question like that, again, I can't help reading in, because of the way the question is put, with all of those prepositional phrases of, they all sound like they're trying to justify something.
Yes.
According to objectivism,
qualification.
According to objectivism, is it okay to have sex with anyone?
Anyone.
Who is the highest and best partner that I can find at this time?
At this time, now consider that. Anyone and at this time kind of tell you what the whole question's really about, isn't it?
It makes it sound like I'll be serious about this later.
Later, exactly.
So let
No,
it
but
be. Let,
we
let her
used the
pick
basic
off.
phrase earlier, though. The
Yeah,
highest value. Yeah,
right.
that's what we're looking for, is the highest available value, all other things being equal. But please do now read Leonard's answer.
Yes. And Dr. Peikoff's answer is very short, which I think is appropriate for the question.
Yes.
He says, I've explained in the past, there's no problem with affairs. Now, I should say, when Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff would use the word affairs, they didn't necessarily mean having an affair like while you're married, sleeping with somebody else. They just mean a sexual relationship that is outside marriage. Leonard Peikoff says, I've explained in the past, there's no problem with affairs if you share serious values. But when you add in at this time, then no. How could that possibly be consistent with objectivism? What else is around you at this time? Well, what if there were a lot of crummy, bad people? But, this girl, well, she just works for Hitler part-time. So she's the highest and best that I can find. I mean, it's ridiculous.
She only works for Hitler part-time. That's great. Because if you're really approaching it like that, anyone
Yes.
at this time the best, then, well, comparatively the best might be a complete nightmare, a toxic, abusive, exploiting individual, something that, or someone with some horrible vice that it makes it absolutely impossible. No, no,
It's
no, no,
not
no.
my fault.
When we
This is
say the highest available value, we don't reject the minimum requirements
yes.
that any kind of serious exchange of affection relationship would require. I couldn't even have a friend that way with someone who only is a Nazi part-time, much less have that be my romantic partner. So
Well,
the formulation there sort of speaks for itself. No, I would rather, and here the example, I'll use an Ayn Rand example. Here she's using political freedom, but I would rather live on a desert island and have no sex, whatever, than have sex with someone who is that crummy. That's a disvalue to me. I would have a hard time even doing it or enjoying it, frankly, if it was a person like that. I'd rather have no sex and take care of myself completely. Thank you very much. If that's my only choice pool, my only choice pool. Obviously, we're talking about real values and real virtues. And if a person doesn't exemplify that, they're not even on the radar screen, my friends. They shouldn't be on the radar screen. You're just getting yourself in. Let me also predict in an interpersonal way, you're just getting yourself into a deep problem that's going to manifest later. If you develop a relationship like that. So no, we have absolute minimum standards about what the values, and there has to be an exchange of values and virtues of the highest order, which you take seriously. If that's not present, look, I'd rather not be in a relationship, frankly, if that's the condition. So yes, we are looking for the highest value that we can find, but there obviously is a minimum standard here. A bad person, an abusive person, a person who's not right for you even, it's better not to have the relationship, frankly. Even though objectivism says sex is good, we're encouraging you to go find it, enjoy it. And we're not going to prescribe any particular, mechanical rules about it. But think of the false alternative there. That people are also dealing with. There are times when we're just discovering, and that contextual discovery process, though, doesn't give us an excuse to just sleep with anyone we happen to find on a street corner. Because again, as you pointed out, you're really missing out on the essence of what the value is.
Right. Leonard Peikoff finishes his answer to this. My immediate reaction was, and I apologize if the person who asked Leonard Peikoff this in August of 2010 is listening to this show right now, but after the question, the first thing I thought was, well, what can you do when you have to deal with people? To steal a line from Robert Stadler. Right. Leonard Peikoff finishes his answer saying, well, you have to judge objectively, not comparatively. or as you said, James, have some standards. You can justify anybody on the grounds that in some group, well, they would be just as bad or worse. It's like saying, well, should I eat the best food available to me that I can find at this time, even if it's poison?
Even if it's poison.
Or should I keep looking? Neither are happy options, but you'll have a shot at it if you keep looking.
But definitely, I would advise stay away from poison as such. If it really is food, and even tasty, nutritious food, it's not on the menu. Thank you at all.
Yes, but yes, some standards. Well, we could go further with that. In fact, I'll do this real quick because we're running a little long. But final question: Leonard Peikoff asks, "Well, what is wrong with swinging at parties? Isn't this only an expansion of sexual activities and the pursuit of pleasure that sex brings?" And I'll read just part of Dr. Peikoff's answer real quick. He says, "No, I think you could define swinging as adultery without deception or promiscuity without pretense. In other words, sex without implying anything to the woman." Excuse me, let me read this again because the phraseology is interesting. In other words, sex without implying to the woman, "I love you, you're so great," and then going next door to the next one. This time you're telling her right there, "Well, I'm waiting for the next one, but I'll just get through you first." If you know the objectivist view of sex, that it is not primarily physical, that it rests on basic values, then you wouldn't even consider this. If you find your basic values all over the place, in a whole gathering of neighbors, in any gathering, well, then you have no values. And sex to you is just a physical sensation, like an animal would feel. You're free to live that way, but then I suggest you give up, well, say cooked food. Just eat nuts and berries, live in a cave, go whole hog with it. And then Leonard Peikoff explains, he says, "I actually think that the true motive of swingers has nothing to do with enjoying sex. I think they get a thrill because they are free of morality and they're thumbing their noses at reality. I can do whatever I want. I don't care what's right or wrong. I don't care about anybody or anything. Nobody and nothing can touch me. This is my little realm to flaunt my whims." Unquote. He gives a little bit more there, but that immediately makes me think of the one archetype of, this isn't even really a value to me, but I'm doing it to prove I can get away with anything, was the president of the United States from 1992 to 2000. There was no reason whatsoever for the Monica Lewinsky affair other than I need to prove to myself that I can do anything. Facts, reality be damned.
It was a chronic problem in Bill Clinton's self-esteem that he was a power seeker in the first place becomes obvious to me. And therefore, a girl that he really does not respect or have any intention of having a long-term relationship with, he's using her to demonstrate that his power can do this.
Yes.
The psychological chronic lack of self-esteem, the same thing, let me suggest, that's making him a power luster. Yeah. If someone says they're in love with their wife, but they're sleeping around with everybody else, then what they're telling maybe themselves or their partner is, "I'm still looking." Or they're telling themselves in private, "Look at all the conquests I can get," and therefore trying to boost their self-esteem. But it's never going to work. They're never going to get self-esteem from the number of conquests they get. Notice what this is. It's a strange combination of rejecting Christian morality when it comes to sex. Aha, they're so repressed and uptight, I can have sex with anyone I want, while retaining the Christian notion of love everybody. So they've destroyed the concept of actual love by applying it promiscuously across the board, when love is preference, when love is exception making, when love is singling someone out. No, you're special to me. If love doesn't have that singling out special part of it, again, we come back to you're missing the actual value here. If this person doesn't give you a special, particular, individualized, selfish pleasure, then what the heck are you doing there but assuaging your psychology or your self-esteem in some way? That's what's really going on. But it seems to me that it's a bizarre conjunction of we reject Christianity on their view about sex, but we accept Christianity's promiscuous view of love everybody.
Exactly right. We got a super chat from Kindred Amy. She's in again and says, such a great discussion. Well, thank you for that. I agree. This is a great discussion. And yes, the idea of I will sleep with anybody. And of course, they always make the claim, well, our group is all decent people. They're all good people. And their primary virtue is so-called honesty. We're open with our partners. Our marriage is open. Our relationships are open. When we sleep, we don't make any pretense that this is a deep love that's going to last forever, any exclusivity. But it's kind of like, do you remember a few years back, it was going around the idea of radical honesty. And the idea was to be radically honest, you would say anything that came to mind, including really insulting things like, you look like crap today. Just whatever was on your mind, the radically on, and it was parodied in a lot of television shows.
Those pants
some
really
people
do
took
make
it
your rear end
seriously.
look big.
And I made the point at the time that radical honesty is neither. It's neither radical nor honest.
Right.
And that's what I see in this idea of open relationships. Well, we elevate honesty. All of my wives or all of my husbands know what's going on, but they've thrown just about every other virtue out the window. It's kind of like the libertarians saying we have the non-aggression principle, the non-initiation of force principle. We'll take that out of context and put that on a throne, and we can do and say and get away with anything else.
You know what it strikes me as? If you say, I love this person and that's who I'm having an intimate relationship with, but all these other people that I'm sleeping with, wait a minute here, you're devaluing the actual thing that you're I wonder about that primary relationship where you say, I'm in love, because now you're willing to spread the special intimate thing you share with this person, well, with a whole list of other people. It's got to devalue the love that you have with the person you really claim to love, however honest it is. If you're promiscuous, sex is just sex and I can have it with a whole list of people. What you've done is you've completely devalued the sex in that allegedly loving relationship you have with your primary partner. No. Sex has to, I'm going to say the word, it has to be highly discriminatory or it isn't love. And as I'm going to come back to this, Christianity and other philosophical approaches have gotten us to think, well, love is not a question of my selfish values at all. Love is a question of being good to everyone. Well, if that's the approach you take to sex too, then my God, you've destroyed any standards in sex at all. If it is not special, if it's not super special, if it's not a pinnacle value, then you are looking at sex in the wrong, or seeking at least a pinnacle value. Then you're looking at it in the wrong way. You're not even seeking the value, the highest value can be, the value I get from it, frankly, which requires both a psychological component, a deep admiration component, as well as the physical component. And it's the two coming together. It's the sharing of that intense intimacy with the person that I most highly admire in this context that makes it so cool. And if that's not what you're seeking, then you're not seeking the greatest value in personal interactions in life. And I feel sorry for you. That's all I can say.
Yeah, we are not Jordan Peterson or Ben Shapiro, who think self-assertion, selfishness, that means going to the bar, picking up chicks. Even if you're married with kids at home, whatever you can do to get, we are not that. And you're right, that is the false alternative to the religious idea of, sex should be something very, very, I don't even know the right word for it, but no, we say, no, there's nothing special about sex. Have it wherever you can, wherever you can. If you take values seriously, that means what? It means you take yourself seriously. That's the virtue of pride. It means you take your life seriously. And then you're going to look out there and say, well, I don't take her seriously, but let me have some of that. No. If you take yourself seriously, if you take your life seriously, then you take your values seriously. And no, you don't have to wait until the perfect partner comes along to have a romantic sexual relationship. But it certainly shouldn't be a swingers party where, oh, that looks good, let me have some of that.
Right. Because now it's not your real values. It's not going to be an exchange of values. It's not going to be the fusion of mind and body. And that's what objectivism sees romantic love and sex as. It's this amazing, I urge people to read The Running of the John Galt line sequence from Atlas Shrugged. It does involve the day and evening when Hank and Dagny first make love. And it is one of the most powerful sequences in all of literature. It could be the single most powerful romantically drawn sequence in all of literature, as far as I'm concerned, because it does, Ayn Rand is stressing that you can't have one without the other, and that if they do share these pinnacle values together, it really must be expressed in some physical way. But on the other hand, that physical expression itself it's nothing if it doesn't express our highest values. And so it's this union of the physical and the spiritual. It's our highest values. And when high values in this regard and high values in that regard match, that's when we're talking about love. To deprive yourself of one or the other is to cut yourself off from half of the pleasure of sex. And again, I can only think that the villain here is Plato. The villain here is religion. And it's separated us, and it's told us that our bodies over here, our spirits over here, our material values over here, our highest spiritual values over here. No, romantic love is the pursuit of that fusion, the highest fusion of that we can find.
I couldn't say it better myself. We are neither Plato nor Dionysus.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we're running long, so we'll wrap this up. We're not done talking about these issues because there is more to say on the positive side, including more answers that we will find from Dr. Leonard Peikoff and this outstanding volume, Keeping It Real, that we are having so much fun with. I think we're hitting episode 50. Is that what our producer told me?
We're coming up to our 50th episode on Ayn Rand Center UK. It'll be next week. Next week is also the 100th episode, I understand, of HBTV, Harry Binswanger's program on ARCUK. Quite some milestones to be proud of, I think.
And he has not run out of things to say. That's the great thing about doing a show like this. Yeah. When I was writing my last episode of my own show was, oh, wait, I'm kind of repeating something I said before. Well, this is an ongoing conversation, and especially with the chat to read at the same time. We keep developing these ideas, and we need to reinforce them because I think all of us are trying to live this stuff, make our lives better, make our lives the best that they can be. If you want to make your life better, watch more of the Ayn Rand Center UK coming up at 1 o'clock Eastern time. That's 6 o'clock in the UK, 10 a.m. We've got National Conservative Conference recap. That's right. We're going to tell you what to think of what happened at the National Conservative Conference. In particular, Nikos is going to meet with Nicholas Krusek. That's going to be a good conversation, and it's less than an hour away. Now, if that's a little too topical for you, if you want to go even deeper, at 5 o'clock Eastern time, 10 o'clock in the UK, Lee Pearson is talking to Jean Moroney. They are doing a deeper plunge into the subconscious. Now, knowing Jean and Dr. Binswanger, her husband, and their perspective on the conscious mind and the subconscious, it'll be interesting to hear Jean Moroney talking to Lee Pearson because they agree, except where they don't. That's going to be a good conversation as well. We have a final super chat. Bonnie Bertrand just came in and says, this great episode made me want to read the book. Thank you for that, Bonnie. You know, when you think you know everything there is to know about objectivism, and now you're just trying to put it into practice, and then you come across a volume like this, and you think, I heard most of those podcasts when they were on Dr. Peikoff's website, and then you crack the book, and you're like, here are insights that I never thought of, never addressed myself before, and I've got Dr. Peikoff's wisdom to work on it in my own mind. So thank you for that, Bonnie. I absolutely agree. The book surprised me. Been around a long time. I thought, do I need another book? Turned out I did. Well, James, your conversations about these topics that are coming up in this book have been invaluable. This is another good one. Folks, have lots of sex, but take it seriously. Oh, can you do both? Yes, you can, James. I think you've made that point with us. Thank you very much for another outstanding conversation. And folks, have a great afternoon.